In 2006, television actor Allison Mack attended a 2-day NXIVM motivational coaching seminar. By 2015, she was a leading figure in NXIVM founder Keith Raniere's women-only subgroup Dominus Obsequious Sororium, or DOS, where she led efforts to have members branded with her initials just above their pubic region. In order to join DOS, women had to provide nude photos and various other compromising bits of information which Mack and Raniere used to blackmail them into having sex with Raniere and then force them to perform tasks for group leaders. Mack was arrested and pled guilty to racketeering, extortion, and forced labor. She faced up to 15 years of prison time and released a letter calling her involvement with NXIVM the biggest mistake of her life and offered to help with the prosecution of Raniere. The judge ordered her to 3 years of prison time and 3 years of probation, as well as 1,000 hours of community service and to pay a $20,000 fine. What would make a reasonably successful, reasonably bright, reasonably attractive woman in her mid-30s commit such horrendous acts of emotional and physical abuse? Mack was only the point of a pyramid of abuse, with underlings performing similar actions to women further down the triangle. Perhaps NXIVM leader Raniere had gotten inside their heads. Perhaps they had been brainwashed into serving him. This is a common conclusion that people often jump to in cases of cult activity or cult-like abuse, but it's a red herring. We're tempted to say people aren't capable of doing things like this of their own free will. We'd rather think that rare, aberrant sociopaths simply twist their minds into doing horrible things. We don't want to believe that people who look and act a lot like us can behave so irrationally, but they do. Although Mack likely wouldn't have branded or blackmailed women if she'd never met Raniere, she also chose to do all of these things of her own accord, which is what made her legally responsible for her actions. As for her victims, no matter how they attempted to justify their membership in DOS to themselves, blackmail and coercion were necessary to keep them in the organization, which suggests Raniere was not especially successful at controlling their minds. Mack was guilty because she was acting of her own free will, and she's repentant for the same reason. Today, on Occult Confessions, I dispel the myth of cult brainwashing. Here with my favorite cultists, Olivia Littoral, Grand Master of the Order. You ready for this cult brainwashing? You were made for this topic.
What does that mean?
I don't mean you were made to be called brainwashed, but this is like this is your Netflix, YouTube jam.
Yeah, that's true.
Not?
My mom always said that if I was at the right time in the right place, I probably would have been in a cult. You know.
You wouldn't have started one? She thinks you just would have been a joiner?
She thinks like if I'd been around during Manson, that I would have snatched me right up.
Oh no, that's horrible to think. She says, how young were you when she started telling you this?
She wasn't like telling me from birth, like, yes, my child. In a past
you
life.
You would have been a Manson killer.
Yeah, like, nah.
Also, please say hello to Johnny Cook, our patron progenitor.
Howdy, howdy.
How about you? Would you join a cult, you think?
I'd have to weigh the pros and cons.
Of each cult or just generally?
Of each one. I'd have it like people would present
it's
me.
It's like, I know I want to join one. I just don't know which yet.
Yeah. 100% on joining one, but it's just which one. You know, you got to like, I don't know, presentation.
Oh, they have to
some
pitch
kind.
it to you? Like a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
It's like a meeting of
exactly
being John's cult. And everyone's got their PowerPoint.
It's like a marketing thing.
Wow,
it's like a marketing thing. Yeah.
How many episodes did I need to produce to get you to join this cult?
Probably 2.
I think you just like yelled at him in the hallway
so
and was just like, "Hey, come here." And he was like, "Yeah."
He was like, "Do you have a couple episodes I could listen to before I join? I'd like to weigh my options."
It was 100% of me joining a cult, and Rob was the only one pitching it, so it was kind of...
Oh, I had no competition.
No.
That's right. My name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson. I am your Supreme Hierophant for today's activities, and let us pledge our way in. We, the members of the
secret order of alchemical actors, do solemnly commit ourselves to a full and honest telling of the history of the occult as far as we know it.
All right, Olivia, there's not too much to do, but go ahead and open up that order.
Oh my God, I didn't think about this, but we're opening up the order.
See, whenever you're here, people wait to hear the lyrics. That's what they're waiting for, is what are the lyrics going to be?
Yeah, I also am waiting to know what the lyrics are.
It's a surprise for everybody.
It's thrilling.
So here's the thing. This is the beginning of our summer break. So I guess we're opening up the order of confessors to say we have no confessors to announce or reviews, and we won't in the short term.
Sorry.
It's a little ironic.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's just how it is. But I do want to pitch some things to you. For example, to join our Patreon, where there are countless, at this point, not countless, you can count them, but there are a number of bonus episodes. Olivia's got episodes up on Bathory. I've got stuff on fallen angels and rock music, and we got serial killers up there. All sorts of fun things happening on the Patreon if you join. Discord is a thing that we also encourage you to come on over to. If you have not joined the Discord, wonderful community. And if you haven't seen what we're up to on YouTube, go ahead and check that stuff out. We are a fairly quiet presence on YouTube.
Strong but steady.
But we are steady. Dan's keeping it rolling over there, creating.
We're the strong silent type.
Aww.
on YouTube. Not over here. We are not
we're
silent.
Fucking loud here.
Close us up, Olivia.
I'm committed to that sound, I guess. We're closing up the order.
It's a little show tune.
I don't know. I felt like I was parading. Yeah, I don't know. It was a weird one.
I feel like on the YouTube, I don't know how the edits are done exactly, but there needs to be a cane.
Yeah.
At the end of that.
Hat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That. Speaking of Allison Mack, right? That was the mascot for the WB, where I believe her show appeared. Am I too old for you guys at this point?
She's not the Smallville.
Yeah.
Okay,
Smallville.
she is the one.
That was the WB, wasn't it? Or the CW?
CW.
I was about to say, what's the WB?
That was the CW. The WB is where you watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, CW is like Supernatural.
I think it became CW after that.
Oh.
Yeah, anyway, listeners can write in and let us know about the history of these channels.
CW.
Depending on when you were born and what nerdy shows you were into. On the 5th of June, 2002, a soft-spoken, nicely dressed man broke into the Salt Lake City home of Edward and Lois Smart. He entered the bedroom of two daughters, 14-year-old Elizabeth and 9-year-old Mary Catherine. He threatened Elizabeth with a knife and got her out of bed. She stubbed her toe on the way out of the room, and he told her to be quiet if she didn't want to get hurt. Mary Catherine attempted to tell her parents, but was nearly caught by the abductor, who was standing in the hallway. She hid in her bedroom for 2 hours before going to her parents' room. At first, they thought that their little girl was just having a nightmare, but then they noticed the cut screen, that is to say the window screen showing how the criminal had come in the house. Elizabeth Smart's kidnapper, Brian David Mitchell, had recently been excommunicated by the Mormon Church for claiming to be the prophet Emmanuel. Dressed in robes in imitation of Jesus, he became a street corner preacher, panhandling with his third wife, Wanda Barzee, who came to call herself Hephzibah. Mitchell had spent time in juvenile hall for exposing himself to a child when he was 16 and was briefly a member of the Hare Krishnas, but had been regularly attending Mormon services before he was kicked out. So a bit of a spiritual seeker, I guess we could say.
Yeah,
being
you can't
very
be Hare Krishna and be exposing yourself to children. That's not... That's a conflict
runs
of
against
interest.
the ethos.
Yeah.
That's what that orange robe is for, to prevent all the exposing.
Oh, Lord. All right.
Mitchell, what?
No, not you. I'm just sighing at men.
So and
it's
their
just
robes. It's a man sigh.
Yeah.
It's going to get worse. But his wife is involved, I got to say, just for gender equity here. Mitchell and Barty, his wife, had established an encampment outside the city where they brought Elizabeth Smart after Mitchell abducted her. There, they made her change into a robe, washed her feet, and married her to Mitchell, trigger warning here, who then raped her to consummate the ritual. He told her he was an angel and a king and would be martyred and then rise from the dead to do battle with the Antichrist. He claimed she was the first of many virgin brides he would eventually abduct. Smart lived in a tent, shackled to a tree, where she was regularly abused by Mitchell, sometimes starved, fed garbage, drugged, and shown pornographic magazines. It's just sort of like classic pedophilic behavior, that last one.
Oh, it just totally clicked. I think I totally know
who Elizabeth Smart is. Yeah,
about. Yeah, because was he like a family friend?
Not exactly, but you're close. You're close.
Or something.
Yeah.
Like
he knew them.
He knew them, because then he did the whole alien thing, or not alien, or whatever the fuck, right?
Let's see. I don't know. Let's see.
Okay. Anyway,
so
sorry.
They called. Mitchell and Barzee called Elizabeth Esther, changed her name, and concealed her identity with a headscarf and veil when they brought her into public with them. Pretty daring stuff. They went to the Salt Lake City Public Library, where a patron took notice of the trio because, it's kind of a weird getup. A police detective came in and interviewed Mitchell, who persuaded him that Smart was his daughter and then told him his religion forbade women from speaking in public. The cop was like, all right. In September, they moved to an encampment outside San Diego, making it even less likely that Smart would be recognized. But the next month, her sister Mary Catherine, who had been haunted since the kidnapping by the sense that the voice of Elizabeth's abductor was a familiar one, finally remembered who that voice belonged to. It was a man calling himself Emmanuel, who'd done odd jobs for the family around the yard. The family described the man to a sketch artist, and his picture was made public. 5 months later, in Sandy, Utah, 2 couples recognized Mitchell from the sketch, and police arrested Mitchell and Barzee and rescued Smart. Pretty amazing, really, when you think about all those pieces coming together. But for a few things there, right? She would still be, or could have gone on. Way to go, that sister. She was like 9 years old.
Yeah, but this girl ends up just going back and forth, right?
Well, it gets weird. So after her abduction, the media promoted a narrative that Elizabeth Smart had been brainwashed. On Good Morning America, Smart's father, Edward, actually said he thought his daughter had been brainwashed by Mitchell and Barzee. Now, why would Dad say this about his own daughter? He was attempting to account for why his daughter, hidden up in the hills behind her very own home, didn't respond to searchers passing through the woods calling her name. So all she would have had to say is, "Hey, I'm here." So he couldn't make sense of why she didn't do that. They were walking right by her. Edward was also speculating as to why Smart hadn't fled during the 9 months of her captivity, despite repeated trips to public places. So, if she's in the library, why didn't she just walk off? Or run off? Or, scream, "I'm being kidnapped." Commentators anxious to embrace the brainwashing narrative compared Smart to Patty Hearst. You guys know about Patty Hearst?
The name sounds familiar.
Okay, yeah. So vaguely. All right. So in 1974, Patty Hearst had been kidnapped by a left-wing guerrilla group called the Symbionese Liberation Army, or the SLA. The SLA wanted to trade her for 2 members who had been arrested. Instead, Hearst ended up sympathizing with their cause, produced an audio tape saying she joined the SLA, changed her name to Tanya, and helped the SLA to rob a bank. So Patty Hearst, Yikes. She was rich and famous. She was an heiress, essentially. So that's why she would have been, good fodder for such a trade. But then there she is.
Okay, because I was wondering why the fuck her. But...
The Hearst,
why she'd be worth trading for 2 people.
The Hearst. You know the Hearst family, the publications and all that? The Hearsts?
No,
not really.
I don't know. Just assume okay, I don't
fine,
know.
Fair enough. This is not an episode about the Hearsts. But they were, needless to say, they were very rich, and she was one of them.
I believe you.
But how is there a correlation between her and Smart?
So
it's not like she claimed to join them.
No.
She's probably just scared, right?
Yes. So in Hearst's case, she actively joined this group and committed crimes with them. And at her trial for the robbery, she claimed that she had been brainwashed into participating. Later, researchers discovered that she had actually previously identified with a variety of far-left causes. That doesn't rule out the possibility that she may have been coerced, though, by violence or a desire to appease her captors, but she most certainly wasn't brainwashed in the sense of being made to adopt beliefs that she didn't have before the kidnapping. Well, go ahead.
Is Stockholm Syndrome a thing already? I don't know
We're
when
coming,
that
yeah,
was,
so
like,
you're right there
coined.
with me. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Stockholm Syndrome. Smart, for her part, Elizabeth Smart, coming back to the present day, or at least the 21st century, rejected the idea that she had been brainwashed into falling in love with her captors. But she was open to the idea that she had a kind of Stockholm Syndrome that involved appeasing her captors to avoid further punishment. The reason she hadn't run away is that she had been tethered. The reason she hadn't spoken up in public is that she feared for her life. She certainly wasn't interested in maintaining ties with Mitchell or his ideas after her rescue. Writing about her experience 6 years later, Smart said, "We all have different ways of getting through our experiences after we come home. One of the ways I did this was to set goals, to work continually toward those goals, and then to set new ones. Finding healthy emotional outlets helped me a lot as well. One of my outlets was playing my harp." She also mentioned her religion, which Mitchell had failed to separate her from, despite his own beliefs. She said, "Having religion as part of my life not only helped me understand my trials better and brought me comfort, but it also provided a support group for me from other members of my faith." I quote Smart at length here, just to demonstrate that as soon as she got away from these people, she went essentially right back to being the person she was before, albeit with trauma that she had to work through. That's all they left her with, was trauma, not a new belief system. So Stockholm Syndrome, I think, Olivia, is often misunderstood. We think that it means that you to adopt the mindset of your captor, but actually what you'd end up doing is internalizing this attitude of trying to appease them so that they don't kill or hurt you. It's a
self-preservation.
Yeah, it's a survival response. Yeah, and I think that's essentially how it functioned for Smart. With Hearst, that it may have been similar, but there's the complications of Hearst's own beliefs. Most modern histories of brainwashing ascribe the origins of the idea to psychologists attempting to make sense of captured American soldiers speaking out against the American government during the Korean War. Have you guys, either of you, come up against this before? The beginning of brainwashing as an idea?
No. But weren't people against the war to begin with?
The Korean War?
Yeah.
Well, people have been against every war, John.
Yeah. I mean, like, wasn't there like a large movement, or am I getting that confused with Vietnam?
That's Vietnam, probably.
More Vietnam, okay. Yeah. In both cases, the United States was attempting to counter communism. The Korean War was about communism, unlike World War II.
Yeah.
Korea became a kind of proxy space for capitalism versus communism, with the Russians and the Chinese backing North Korea, what became North Korea, and the United States backing South Korea.
And didn't they have a draft for Korea and Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, the Korean draft would have followed right on the tails of World War II. My grandfather was part of the occupation of Japan. Both my grandfather and grandmother technically were in the Korean conflict, but they were part of the occupation of Japan. So that's,
okay.
The end of World War II, but it's also the Korean War. Like, we were occupying Japan in part because, we defeated Japan in World War II, but it's the Korean War because we are actively fighting in Korea, and our outposts in Japan are serving that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I'm trying to set up maybe because they were drafted, and I guess I was getting confused with Vietnam. But if there was already a belief that war was unjust or something like that, then them having a platform to speak out, I guess, makes more sense than if they signed up for it and then turned around and changed their beliefs. As far as the brainwashing goes.
From my grandparents, from my family experience, I would say that Korea and Vietnam are different in that Korea, because it was on the tails of World War II, was like, you joined the army because it was a good thing to do, right? You were fighting, for the good cause.
Gotcha. Very patriotic.
Yeah, because you beat the Nazis, right? The army beat the Nazis. The army beat the Japanese, who, by the way, in World War II were pretty horrible. So there was, I think, this lingering belief through the 40s and into the 50s that this was just a generally good thing to do. You know what I mean?
Okay. So there wouldn't be a lot of reason for them to just turn around and start speaking out.
No, I think our complicated relationship with communism started in the late 60s and then into the 70s. And then in the 80s, it got super weird with Iran-Contra and all that stuff. So, yeah.
McCarthyism or whatever.
Yeah, the McCarthyism
fuck.
of the 50s, yeah. It's all there, but it's not metastasizing into weird foreign conflicts until post-Korea, necessarily.
Okay.
Both the Nazis and the Americans attempted to develop techniques for converting enemy captives to their captors' ideology and then deploy them as double agents. America continued these efforts for 25 years after the war, but the results were inconclusive at best. The journalist and possible CIA operative Edward Hunter coined the term brainwashing based on the Maoist concept of what the Chinese call re-education. In Korea, as in China, victims weren't re-educated so much as beaten into submission. So they call it re-education, but it's really just beating the crap out of you.
I was going to say, it sounds like conversion.
Yeah, yes. I think that's a good metaphor, Olivia, insofar as you're not going to change anything about that person, who they are underneath. You're just going to beat them into claiming to agree with you. You know what I mean? Scare them.
Yeah.
It's just like any kind of torture.
Yeah. I mean,
or like the old witch trials. They're just going to hurt you until you say what they want you to say.
Yes. Yeah. Members of the British military vouched for the brainwashing, and American servicemen were featured in recordings where they told Americans that they had converted to belief in the superiority of communism and then accused the American government of using chemical weapons against the Chinese and the Koreans. So they created these tapes and sent them on home. American GI says America is, gassing the Korean communists, that kind of stuff. The psychologist Robert J. Lifton conducted research on servicemen and Chinese expatriates who had been subjected to indoctrination techniques and concluded that if their thinking had changed in captivity, it returned to normal once they reached the U.S. In other words, they had not been brainwashed in any meaningful way. Only 11 out of 3,000 retained their communist beliefs after their release. 11 out of 3,000. And in-depth interviews with those 11 revealed that they had communist sympathies before their capture.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, I mean, I'm just hammering home this point, and I'm going to keep going, that it's not possible to permanently alter someone's belief system unless they want to go along with you. In China, re-education was and continues to be a kind of dystopian doublespeak, the word re-education. Citizens deemed counter-revolutionary are imprisoned or subjected to forced labor and harsh conditions in order to correct their so-called anti-communist ideas. Just a quick side note here. I suggest looking up the artist Ai Weiwei.
I was literally just about to mention him. I was like, is that the same? Because that was China,
Ai Weiwei,
right?
yes. He's a Chinese artist. Kind of a bit of a performance artist, bit of a visual artist. He does different things, and he has this great video on YouTube about what it was like to be in Chinese prison, to be re-educated.
Did I watch that for your
did,
class?
Yeah.
Is that why I... Oh, okay. I was like... Because I've definitely seen that.
Is he still in China?
No, I believe he's in the United States now.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, he had to... Because he was like... It was like an intense like
he was under house arrest. Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, what the fuck is that called? I couldn't think of it.
Yeah, the Chinese are very good at that.
It's like extreme version of that.
And he just pissed off the communist government by speaking his mind in his art, and that's why they decided they needed to re-educate him. But he was a bold guy. He would go back and forth between the West and China, and finally they just got him. But I would imagine under Xi Jinping that he's a little more reticent to return to China. Xi Jinping does not mess around. The Chinese government is serious these days. Not that they haven't always been, but they actually haven't. In the 80s, they were much more lax. But yeah, it's gotten real intense. If they no longer express their previous views, that is to say, Chinese counter-revolutionaries, it isn't so much because they no longer hold them as that they fear further punishment. During the Korean War, the CIA knew that brainwashing was a myth, but used the term to explain away statements made by prisoners of war against the U.S. military effort. It became a kind of counter-propaganda. So when the Koreans or the Chinese would beat the American soldier into saying, the U.S. does this and the U.S. is evil and all this stuff, then they would ship the tape over, the CIA would be like, that guy was brainwashed.
I've never thought of that that way.
So they didn't believe it.
Or that it could be used that way.
This is a false concept that they were just using to paint a easy narrative to help people digest and dismiss these weird tapes they were seeing. The concept of brainwashing has had its most productive life in the West in relation to new or alternative religious movements. So now we're coming closer to home. It has become a useful tool to make sense of how a seemingly ordinary member of Western society can come to adopt fringe beliefs about the nature of reality and life. In this context, the origin of brainwashing went back almost a century before the Second World War to the rise of Mormonism in the American West. Yes, this is the Mormons' second appearance in today's episode. I'm not trying to pick on them. I think many Mormons are lovely people. But in this case, I'm actually going to be quite nice to the Mormons because I think that America treated the early Mormons kind of shabbily. And some of the early Mormons were not so cool, but others were perfectly fine, ordinary people just trying to live their lives. Americans have a long tradition of hostility to new religious movements. In truth, humanity has a long tradition going back to the Roman persecution of Jesus and the Christian persecution of everyone, but all the sects it deemed heretical, from the Manichaeans to the Lollards. We just love to persecute people who have new religious ideas. We're very threatened by them. In the 19th century, the largely Protestant American public was anxious to believe lurid anti-Catholic tales like Maria Monk's imagined tale of rape, infanticide, and murdered nuns at a convent in Montreal. We've shared a full account of Monk's story on this show, as well as the story of Margaret Fox, one of America's first spiritualist mediums who was attacked by a mob in the first days of her public mediumship. So the stories are just all over the history books of people losing their minds when somebody comes out with an idea about God or the afterlife that they disagree with. People take this very seriously. I guess that's why we have this show. Yeah.
Yep. Plug the Patreon.
Come on over.
Right there.
keep us going, patrons. Keep us talking about things that make people throw bricks at our houses. I don't.
Please don't throw bricks at our houses. Please.
The Mormons were similarly run out of New York and Illinois. By that I mean they were run out. Not that they were running out of. They were sprinting. They
forced out.
Sprinted from New York, Illinois, before settling in Utah, where they essentially created their own state, far enough away from everyone else to go unbothered, that is, until federal troops came after them.
That was part of the whole reason they could really get away with everything, is because he just created his own society with his own cops, his own he had everyone.
Brigham Young, you mean?
Was his. No, I'm talking about Warren Jeff. Sorry, I'm going way in the future. Yeah,
I'm back with Brigham, who was just after Joseph Smith, who died in Illinois. As James R. Lewis points out in his article on the cult controversy, the Mormons posed unique problems for the American public that Catholics did not. Catholics, in Monk's telling, had convents where they confined and physically intimidated nuns to remain with the church, but Mormons roamed free. So this is the beginning. I'm taking you back to the very beginning of belief in brainwashing people into a religious cult. And it's important that we make this distinction. We were mad about the Catholics in Protestant America, but we just said, we didn't need brainwashing because we figured that they were locking those nuns up and beating the crap out of them, and that's why they got them to stay nuns. But with the Mormons, nobody was locked away. So why would anyone who was not enslaved or imprisoned follow the Mormons' strange belief system? The answer came in a book, as it often does. That book was Female Life Among the Mormons, a supposedly non-fictional account of a former Mormon convert who went by the name of Maria Ward. Very similar to Maria Monk. I don't know why that would be, but anyhow. Maria's adventure in Mormonism began in a stagecoach, as everyone's adventure in Mormonism begins, does it not, John?
I would imagine. So. I mean, my journey with occult confessions started in a stagecoach.
I remember that stagecoach.
I just assumed
Olivia was driving
that,
it. She had a mad look in her eye.
Just a madman. Yeah.
Olivia was whipping the horses.
Fucking headless horseman.
I was in the back with John, opening boxes full of human body parts and showing them to him. Yes, it was.
It was convincing. That's all I can say.
If you join us, you can have this lovely ear. Olivia's up there. Yeah.
Yes. Thunder and lightning.
Mush.
Cracking
Work our way
in the
up
distance.
the mountain, and Savannah's cackling from the top of a castle.
Jesus.
Yep, that was John's first day in the OC.
Sold.
Everything was black and white. We have no
Yes.
idea why.
Yes, we were all in black and white. Anyhow, Maria's adventure in Mormonism, back in her stagecoach, she met a man carrying the Book of Mormon and told him she thought he was deluded. Presaging the concerned families of the 20th century, Maria worried over recent Mormon converts who had left their homes.
And poor Miss Maxon was induced to leave her husband and children and go with them. And Maria Ripley, a young woman, left her aged and infirm parent and went off.
The man is unbothered and finds these seeming desertions justifiable.
Are you then a believer in Mormon?
For he that loveth father or mother or husband or wife more than me is not worthy of me.
Hardly a fair way of answering a question.
I am, or I am not.
True. Facts.
Here the
Maria.
conversation takes a significant turn. The stranger pauses. Maria says she was at the time unfamiliar with the doctrine of magnetic influence, but she became aware of some unaccountable power being exercised over me by my fellow traveler.
His glittering eyes were fixed on mine. His breath fanned my cheek. I felt bewildered and intoxicated, and partially at least lost the sense of consciousness and the power of motion.
That's a little...
You're trying to decide whether or not you buy it. Well, John, did that happen to you when I was showing you those body parts and Olivia was driving us up the side of the mountain?
That's what I
Were you a little
remember.
intoxicated by it all?
I was a little intoxicated. Yeah,
The
exactly.
stagecoach stops to change horses. The pair go into an inn to warm themselves. The stranger tells her he wants to stay with her and fixes her with a spell like a snake charmer that she struggles to release herself from, even to glance out the window. The stagecoach leaves without them, and the man, a Mr. Ward, informs her that the Mormons are to have a meeting in this particular town this very night. So begins Maria's descent into female Mormonhood. But the journey began and was abetted by the 19th century equivalent of a brainwasher, a Mormon mesmerist.
I'm sorry, but this sounds like she was sex trafficked, borderline.
Mormonism?
Like if
Yeah.
you just listen to it, like she gets there, the stagecoach leaves, he's like, "Nah, we're staying." Got a spell over her. He's all up in her face and sparkling and shit. I don't. What the hell?
I mean, that's the sparkling is
know.
the operative thing here. I mean, the stagecoach leaves not by accident, but he mesmerizes her into choosing not to follow the stagecoach. When the American says,
Okay, well,
yeah, right. I mean, exactly. That's
okay.
These 19th century Americans are saying, why would anybody be Mormon? And Maria is saying, because magic mind control. That's the only way to account for people following this.
Okay, sure.
So let's jump forward to the anti-cult movement, or ACM. Olivia, you are very familiar, yes?
The anti-cult
No, you're
movement.
not. Children of God,
No.
Unification Church, all that stuff. Yeah, that's
Oh.
the ACM.
Sure, yeah.
Directly poses themselves in opposition. So this was organized in the 1970s as a result of family members of so-called cult converts attempting to get their loved ones back.
Oh,
There you
okay.
go.
On the
So,
same page.
for the religious organizations they had joined. So Families of unification or Children of God converts read about each other in the newspaper. So you would post an ad in the newspaper, my son has joined the Unification Church, I don't know what to do. And then other people would read it. Or you have the article in the newspaper, parents beside themselves with grief over daughter who ran off to join the Children of God and now has sex for Jesus. And people read about these stories and they're like, oh, we should get together because we're all sad about the same thing.
Group therapy.
I was gonna say if that stuff was still being put in the newspaper, I might actually read one. About cults and stuff.
Those were the days. The 70s were the fun times, John, to be reading a newspaper.
I'll take your word for it.
You weren't doing a lot of other things.
You get to read about the Amityville Horror and get to read about, I don't know, Jimmy Carter running for president. In 1972, he was a peanut farmer. It was a good time. In 1972, these people formed Parents to Free Our Sons and Daughters from the Children of God. That is PTFOSADFLFTCOG.
They should work on a shorter name. Sorry.
This was the first major ACM organization. The focus on the Children of God proved too narrow, and the group expanded in 1974 to target other religious movements and renamed itself the Citizens Freedom Council. There you go, Olivia.
That's
a little better.
Yep.
This had a new focus on the far more popular Unification Church, also called the Moonies. These groups had two primary goals: to rescue people recruited into these religious groups and to discredit these so-called cults. So, Olivia, go ahead.
Was Unification cult? Is that the guns? Is that one?
No. They're not especially violent. They had the mass weddings, the Unification Church. That's what they're most known for.
Oh, they do end up getting crazy about guns,
you know more than me, maybe.
No. I watched a documentary a long time ago, but I could be confusing.
They had political motivations, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll get there. You can throw the guns in wherever you think they go.
Well, let's put our guns away right now. But that's a whole other thing.
I think you're right, Olivia, though, that, therapy-wise, it's good for people who are having this experience, parents, to come together and sympathize with each other. But when it comes to all these other activities, that's a whole other kettle of fish. If you're going to try to do things about other people's choices, I don't know. That's sort of like, you get together because with loved people who've lost a loved one, and then you decide, maybe we should just raise them from the dead, rather than trying to work through these feelings. Let's do something about it.
But hey, if they're being brainwashed.
That's the idea.
This is totally, Unification is exactly, I just looked it up. It's what I thought it was. They end up going crazy about fucking guns.
That's news to me. I haven't done much work on Unification. But what do you mean? Like they just stockpile them, Waco style?
I'm trying to remember. They end up, it's like it turns, because once it passed down from that guy and his wife to it passed down to his son, I think, or something, or one of them.
That's when it got gun crazy.
And then they all bring their guns and shit.
The ACM depended on belief in brainwashing to make sense of what they were doing, since freedom of religious belief is a fundamental premise of modern Western thought. And they could not make their case to the government or to the public based on the idea that they were questioning or undermining their family members' right to choose their own religious affiliations. Their converted sons or daughters, they said, hadn't chosen freely to join the Unification Church or the Hare Krishnas or the Children of God. They had been brainwashed against their will. You see, so you can't make a good public relations case, you can't make a good legal case that people can't choose their own religion. That's as American as apple pie. Or guns. Sorry. Deeply sorry. This not only justified the ACM's crusade, but their technique for curing the hypnotized convert. Counter-brainwashing, also known as, Olivia?
Desensitization or something?
Desensitization is what happens when you watch too many 1980s horror movies.
Oh. Or porn.
Or too many porns. Just imagine the couple at the computer and they got the porn on, and then the guy turns to the girl and he's like, damn. She's like, what happened? He's like, I got desensitized. Except for me.
It's over.
Oops. Flew too close to the sun.
One too many.
One too many. Imagine if that happened with like alcohol. Anyway, kind of does.
Oh, they have gun blessing services.
Okay, so
shit.
this is for real.
Sorry.
The Unification Church did bless guns. Okay.
Yeah, because their logo is like
It's a gun now?
two guns
That's
crossing,
madness.
I think, now.
It's
These
horrifying.
intense psychological exercises of deprogramming or counter brainwashing were not only valid, they said, but could be forced on so-called victims, since their conversion was not voluntary. So if you had been forced to adopt your strange beliefs in your cult, then the deprogrammer was justified in taking them away from you by force if necessary. This is all highly legally suspect. Because these are adults. We're talking only about adults here. And grabbing adults, kidnapping adults away from the group they have voluntarily joined, and then forcefully deprogramming them. Initially, the ACM, in the form of various loosely related groups, felt free to abduct people away from the groups they had joined in order to subject them to deprogramming. But as I'm saying, the ACM groups didn't do the deprogramming themselves. They referred people out to professionals in the business. Police looked the other way, deeming these cases to be family issues. But civil liberties groups and the religious organizations themselves pushed back. In response, the ACM promoted the use of conservatorships, generally reserved for allowing family members to handle the legal affairs for an elderly or incapacitated loved one. Britney Spears, of course, the most famous case of a conservatorship that recently has been terminated.
Hashtag bless.
Yes. Amen. The ACM contended that cult brainwashing was cause for granting parents conservatorship over their adult children, and this very briefly became the means for continuing the practice of forced deprogramming. The use of conservatorships was brief because they were successfully challenged by court cases. Many of those court cases financed by the Unification Church. Don't mess with the Unification Church with them guns on their logo. And deprogramming was extremely expensive, making it unavailable for all but the most affluent ACM parents. Remember, your therapist, you are hiring a therapist who is not really a therapist, but is acting and charging like a therapist, to go into somebody's house, abduct them, bring them to their own residence, and then spend days or weeks deprogramming them forcefully.
There was like a guy that became really famous for it, right?
Oh, there were a few, yeah. They ended up on all the Sally Jesse
Yeah.
Raphaels and all them talk shows.
Yeah.
Did it work though?
Interesting you ask that, Sean.
Tales about abusive and questionably scientific deprogrammers began to discourage parents from availing themselves of their services, and the act of deprogramming fell out of favor. The ACM began as a counter-organization to oppose the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies, after their founder, the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. That's why they were called the Moonies, because of the Reverend Moon. In 1936, Moon received a vision of Jesus asking him to complete Jesus' work, and after World War II, he began preaching this new message in his home country of Korea. Moon first sent missionaries to Japan and the United States in 1958 and 1959 before he moved to the U.S. in 1971. His gatherings at Madison Square Garden, Yankee Stadium, and the National Mall in Washington, D.C. drew hundreds of thousands of people. He taught that Jesus' purpose on earth had been to reestablish Eden, an earthly paradise, and that humans could work toward that goal by performing good works to cancel the effects of sin. Eve, he said, was sexually seduced by Satan, creating a contaminated bloodline that Moon removed members from through a blessing given in a mass wedding ceremony comprised of couples who initially were personally matched by Moon. So that's the mass weddings. No guns involved in any of this yet, Olivia, so I guess that must be further down the road.
Mm-hmm. I definitely remember the videos of the mass weddings, and like that shit was like mass weddings. Like,
Yeah.
I think at one point they were doing like it was like 100, like a shit ton of people.
You could see in the
like,
Madison Square Garden, like these big places, they would fill these places.
Yeah.
And you just met this person because you were matched by the Reverend himself.
Ugh.
It's like eHarmony.
That's not a good look for eHarmony.
Moon harmony.
Moon.
Writing in 1979, the scholars Anson Shoup and David Bromley argued that what made the Unification Church so threatening, as well as the Hare Krishnas and the Children of God, by the way, was the degree to which they sought sweeping structural change. So all of these groups were trying to change the culture. By contrast, transcendental meditation, for example, with its focus on individual change, was far less threatening. Because transcendental meditation, you just like meditate and maybe you levitate and it make you feel better and be better. But they're not like...
That doesn't hurt anyone.
It's not going to hurt anybody. But, with Moon saying, we're going to change the world and purge... With Moon saying we're going to change the world and purge sin, and saying, he's saying we're going to change... Children of God, Olivia, these folks, they were challenging a lot of sexual taboos. They were... going out and converting people in bars and stuff. It was far more aggressive.
Yeah, those dudes suck.
The Hare Krishnas in the airports, these are just more aggressive groups, as opposed to TM, which was not threatening at all. This may help to explain why, even in the 2000s, Ranieri's NXIVM went largely unbothered for a very long time, and why it took many decades for anybody to get very upset about Scientology. Let us remember Scientology. We all lost our minds over Scientology, 6 years ago or something?
Because that's the success story, right? That's the big one.
But we just ignored them, essentially. But for a handful of scholars, up until very recently, nobody bothered the Scientologists, although
they were in court so much
to try to get their status, their church status.
Right, or just various just little they were constantly somehow in the spotlight, but not in the spotlight in a way that's
people weren't trying to take them down. Nobody was infiltrating them the way we were with the Moonies or...
Nah, I guess that's why I'm that's the prototype. That's the success story.
And Ranieri, I think, was essentially trying to replicate Scientology, because both of them, at their heart, are non-academic psychological exercises. They're a kind of therapy. Both of them are a kind of therapy.
Well, they're more spiritual than God-y, if that...
religious?
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's not so much God talk.
It's not... Yeah, it's more a spiritual...
Therapy. It's therapeutic technique. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole auditing and blah, blah, blah,
and NXIVM is essentially it feels like a kind of spiritual corporate training, basically.
Yeah.
The Unification Church, in contrast to Scientology and NXIVM, challenged important assumptions underpinning the social order, namely Moon's reinterpretation of Christianity and rethinking of Western marriage arrangements. If you think about those weddings and the fact that he's setting up these marriages and they're being done in this very unusual way, that threatens the social fabric. That bothers us. If NXIVM's just holding a weird conference in a hotel, whatever.
It's not as in your
those
face.
It's a little self-contained.
And it's almost for Ranieri and the Scientologists, they're kind of following... They're not breaking the mold. Ranieri's just going to these hotel rooms and or wherever, these conference centers, and holding conferences, which I go to. I go to conferences. People go to seminars and stuff, get rich quick or whatever. That's a big part of American culture. He's not breaking the mold in any way there.
Yeah. Well, and with the Unification Church, I think they also really nailed in the coffin. I sent you the article for it, but it's just a Vox article. But it they tried to have a whole gun thing right at their place, which is right near. It was either an elementary school or a middle school. And so then people lost their shit because it was oh, well, you've gone too far out of your bounds and now you're in our bounds.
They intentionally court
Do you know what I
controversy.
mean? Yeah.
He defined religion to encompass science, education, and politics, which made Moon's ideas even more potentially transformative and anticipated an imminent return to paradise and promised widespread change to existing systems. This is all threatening the culture. All right, now, I'm going to speculate here. But I think at this point, I'm entitled. I've done my research, so allow me to speculate.
You have a PhD.
I do. Not specifically in this, but it's pretty close to this stuff.
Nah,
Yeah.
That's like a speculation license.
It's a license to speculate in the neighborhood of religion, for sure. I suspect our recent fascination with individual-focused movements like NXIVM and Scientology. Remember, like, these are our obsessions now. We make multiple documentary series about NXIVM. They're the cover of the New York Times. Scientology has gotten huge book treatments and documentaries. And, you know, when some celebrity decides to quit Scientology, it's national news. We suddenly really care about these individual-focused movements. And I think this has its roots in the rise of the individual as the focus of social media in particular. Follow me here. The individual's capacity to go viral and exert cultural influence outside the traditional gatekeepers of the culture makes cults that exclusively corrupt individuals more interesting or threatening than they used to be. Certainly, passionate YouTubers and Twitter posters seem to be able to get people from all corners of the world to believe all sorts of bizarre things just because those people believe them. See, for example, any of our QAnon stuff. In addition to social media, I'd also toss in mass shootings as another inspiration for a newfound interest in psychologically focused cults. Mass shootings are a largely, but not uniquely, American phenomenon. Here, a single human being with a psyche uniquely twisted by any combination of loosely connected or unrelated belief systems can have a terrible impact on dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people's lives. Gun rights advocates often enough will exacerbate this concern by turning the conversation back on the psychological issues that led to the shooting.
Oh, video games.
Or mental illness. Most recently, they're just like, oh, it's evil. Evil is causing this to happen. But these guys are all espousing beliefs or broadcasting their actions on the internet.
Yeah.
They're adopting beliefs. They're being encouraged by the internet, you know, by these social media chat. I almost said chat rooms.
Show your age. It's
all
okay.
these guys in 1999 keep encouraging them.
In AOL, encouraging.
Anyhow,
I mean, did you see the new Batman movie?
Go on.
No,
because that was really prevalent.
The capacity of the social media to encourage dark deeds.
Yes.
Individuals.
Yes.
I mean, it's encouraging an individual to do dark deeds. I think that could be nationally traumatic. And so, a group need not be attempting a mass social transformation on the order of the free-loving communal children of God or vaguely apocalyptic unification church in order to get us excited and worried. The threat of individual psychological transformation is now enough to worry a society where any anonymous person can become an internet celebrity overnight. You buy that?
I think that's I never would have thought about it that way. I think it's a really interesting way to think about, like, that we are just, like, in general, like, people, especially like my age, are so much more focused on themselves and, like, self help, I guess, for a lack of a better term. So that is what would draw in people now to, like, a group, is not so much like the fear of God, but like, hey, like, come to this class where you will help yourself through this spiritual X, Y, and Z. Like that. I could see so many people I know just being like, yeah. Like,
but something like a Children of God was like, oh, we're going to have this commune and create a whole new way of life and all this sort of stuff. It's less appealing, do you think?
Or even just like this being born into it, like, and all that. Like that is like a whole different type of quote, like, you know, brainwashing, I guess. Like,
so sort of like self-advancement versus safety and fear kind of thing.
Right. Well, and I guess then it's fear keeps you there, right?
Once you're in. But I mean, the comparison I'm making is the new school and old school, that the old school cult, quote-unquote cult, is about social change, and the new school cult is about individual change. Or at least the cults that threaten.
Yeah.
And I'm using...
Even if you look at people like Jim Jones, he started off being like super socialist. Like that was like his whole thing, and like people joined him because they wanted to do acts of kindness and like what they quote socialism, unquote. But
now we don't need that kind of stuff. We don't get into that kind of stuff. Politics is maybe too alienating for people. That kind of stuff. That broad social change argument isn't as appealing as it used to be. It's about you, changing you. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I am saying that the change in the focus of the society has resulted in a change in what we considered threatening and cult-like behavior. The way we define a cult now encompasses that individual-focused stuff in ways that it wouldn't have in the 70s necessarily. Mm-hmm. Most famous among the community of psychologists supporting the brainwashing and deprogramming theory was a woman named Margaret Singer. Or is, I should say. Singer evaluated Patty Hearst during her trial and concluded that she had been transformed into a low-affect zombie, but her testimony was never heard by the jury because the prosecution successfully argued that brainwashing had never been admitted as an explanation in a criminal trial before. In an article for Psychology Today, Singer said that cults used conditioning techniques and devalued reason to maintain the loyalty of their members. As the head of an American Psychological Association task force, she attempted to have her theories of brainwashing, which she called deceptive and indirect techniques of persuasion and control, formalized. But the APA rejected the task force's proposal, saying that their recommendations lacked scientific rigor. One of the voices opposing Singer was none other than religion scholar J. Gordon Melton, best known to our listeners as the author of The Biographical Dictionary of American Cult and Sect Leaders. Writing, yeah, this is cool, isn't it? Writing in 1999, Melton said, "Since the 1980s, though a significant public belief in cult brainwashing remains, the academic community, including scholars from psychology, sociology, and religious studies, have shared an almost unanimous consensus that the coercive persuasion brainwashing thesis proposed by Margaret Singer and her colleagues in the 1980s is without scientific merit." And I will let J. Gordon Melton have the last word on this subject. John and Olivia, any thoughts from you before we close it out?
I would be curious. I would be curious to see when that shift that you're talking about happened. From the threat being from the social change groups
the internet,
to the individual
I'd say it
change
started
groups.
In the 90s, but it's Facebook and YouTube and even like what we're doing now. Like we started a podcast, like think about what we do, how many people we reach, and how many people we talk to. These opinions go much further than they did or would have in the past. And there's no gatekeeper for me. For us, we can say whatever we want. We didn't need to get HBO's approval or ABC or NBC or, it used to be that you needed some kind of rich studio to stamp your project. Now we can talk to 20,000 people and we just can,
So it sounds like social media was a thing, not necessarily the internet, because chat rooms.
Well,
were kind of self-contained.
I don't think chat rooms could
bit.
go on the level of an Instagram influencer with 50,000 followers or 100,000 followers. A chat room couldn't accomplish that. The social media really did that, and then YouTube and podcasting can have a similar effect, I believe.
I would say though, one thing is that social media is for all its faults in the matter, it is more regulated than those early
oh yeah I agree,
chat rooms or forums or whatever the fuck. Not that it's still well regulated now, because obviously it's not, because even with all the mass shootings recently, there's plenty of warning signs on the internet. Not even warning signs, but
there's an attempt to regulate, I think, that didn't exist, right? I want to keep people on the line here. I don't want anybody to be off the hook. Because having done this research, I do not believe that anybody can say I was brainwashed or I was misled. You were misled because you wanted to be. You believed in QAnon because you chose to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The internet didn't make you do it. You chose these beliefs,
right.
and you had how many options do you have? Like in this show alone, we've given you like 80 different belief systems that you can pick from. You picked the one that, caused you to do some horrible thing, like storm the Capitol or hurt people or hurt yourself. And it sucks, but
yeah.
We're personally responsible to a large extent for these choices.
It's not like you don't have any information.
Yeah. We've all got the same information when it comes down to it. Maybe there are traumas or things that have happened in your life, and we can say, there's a reason why you were susceptible or why you made these choices, but you still made the choice. You
still made the choices.
Yeah.
Right. And then when the parents, I guess what I'm getting at is, get up there and basically defend their kid, they can say that they're not, but when you sit there and you're like, they did it because of this and that and this and that and all these things that are supposedly not in the person's control, and it's like, no. I don't know. But, one of the moms of the Columbine shooters was doing the same thing back in the day.
Yeah, it goes back to the original.
Publicly defending her son,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think you're right.
I don't know if I made my point at all. They're not listening to the female anymore.
Were they ever?
Oh, the females. Our sources today included James R. Lewis's Apostates and the Legitimation of Repression, Historical and Empirical Perspectives on the Cult Controversy, Elizabeth Aileen Young's Use of Brainwashing Theory by the Anti-Cult Movement, Brainwashing and Cults, The Rise and Fall of a Theory by J. Gordon Melton, Anson D. Shoup and David Bromley's The Moonies and the Anti-Cultists, Female Life Among the Mormons, a narrative of many years' personal experience by the wife of a Mormon elder recently from Utah, published in 1863, and Elizabeth Smart's portion of You're Not Alone, The Journey from Abduction to Empowerment. Olivia, bring us on home.
I hereby adjourn and declare closed this meeting of the Secret Order of Alchemical Actors till such a time as we get together and do it again.
My name is Dr. Robert C. Thompson, joined by Johnny Cook, patron progenitor.
See ya.
Olivia Literal, our master of the order.
Sorry for getting political if Rob kept it in.
So here's where we're at. We're going around the world with this series. We're going to touch on a variety of groups. We got Falun Gong coming. We've got Aum Shinrikyo. We've got Nation of Islam. We have the neo-Nazi occult. So we're leaving... I'm not going to say we're leaving no stones unturned, because when it comes to violent cults, there are a variety of them. But that's really that's the rubric, I guess, for me. When I picked which groups I wanted to talk about, I wanted to make sure I was picking groups, number one, that hadn't already been podcasted to death, like Jim Jones. But number two, I wanted to pick groups that intentionally preached violence against others. Falun Gong is the exception there, and when we do that episode, the Chinese accused Falun Gong, the Chinese government, of doing harm to others, but I don't think there's really a strong case to be made there. That was propagandistic. But that helps us. I think that helps to define our terms here. So that's what we're talking about with dangerous cults this series. And now we've got our theory of brainwashing out of the way. We can get into some specific cases here on Occult Confessions.